Welcome back to Behind the Crime Scene. Today, we're exploring one of Australia's most fascinating paradoxes. How can one of the world's most developed nations struggle so much to find fugitives? Australia is massive. It's the sixth largest country in the world, spanning 7.7 million square kilometers. That's roughly the same size as the continental United States, or 32 times bigger than the United Kingdom. But here's the thing that makes Australia unique. It only has 26 million people. To put that in perspective, the entire population of Australia is less than the population of Tokyo, and 85% of those Australians live in cities along the coast, crammed into a thin strip of urban development. That leaves the rest of the country, the vast interior we call the outback, almost completely empty. This creates a perfect storm for fugitives: massive territory, minimal population, extreme conditions, and limited police resources. It's no wonder that Australia has a long history of people simply vanishing into the landscape, some for weeks, some for years, and some forever. Today, we're going to examine some of Australia's most notorious manhunts, the ones that took too long, the ones that failed, and the ones that revealed just how difficult it is to find someone who doesn't want to be found in this country. Let's start with the fundamental challenge: Australia's sheer size versus its population density. Most Australians live within 50 kilometres of the coast, drive an hour or two inland from any major city, and the population drops off dramatically. Drive another few hours, and you might not see another person for days. The outback covers about 70% of Australia's landmass. It's not all red sand and desert either. There are rugged mountain ranges, dense bushland, tropical forests in the north, and vast pastoral properties larger than entire European countries. Some cattle stations in the Northern Territory cover 10,000 square kilometres or more. This terrain presents unique problems for police. There are areas where roads simply don't exist. Communication infrastructure is limited. Mobile phone coverage is patchy at best. In some regions, you can drive for hours on the only road without seeing a single building. The weather is another enemy. Summer temperatures in the outback regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius. In some areas, it can reach 50 degrees. Water sources are scarce and unreliable. For police conducting searches, the conditions are not just uncomfortable, they're dangerous and potentially deadly. But here's the thing: these same conditions that make searching difficult also make hiding almost impossible for most people. The outback isn't forgiving. You need water, food, shelter, and knowledge of the land. Most fugitives who run into the bush don't last long. They either die from exposure, give themselves up, or are forced to emerge for supplies. The successful fugitives, the ones who evade capture for years, they understand something crucial. You don't hide in the emptiest places. You hide in plain sight, in small communities, on remote properties, or you constantly move through the rural network of farms and stations where no one asks too many questions. Malcolm Naden is perhaps Australia's most famous modern fugitive. From June 2005 until March 2012, he evaded one of the largest manhunts in New South Wales history. He was wanted for the murders of 2 young women, including his cousin Letitia Nolan, aggravated indecent assault, and attempted murder of a police officer. What made Naden's case extraordinary was how he survived in rugged bushland for 7 years. He operated primarily around Gloucester and the Barrington Tops area in the northern tablelands of New South Wales. This is challenging terrain, dense forest, steep valleys, and limited access roads. NSW's police established Strikeforce Durkin specifically to capture Naden. In December 2011, police from the Tactical Operations Unit nearly caught him in bushland near Noondock, but Naden shot a police officer in the shoulder and escaped. The manhunt became a test of endurance and resources. Police used helicopters, tracking dogs, thermal imaging, and extensive surveillance. They spent millions of dollars. The reward for information leading to Naden's capture started at $50,000 and eventually rose to $250,000. How did Naden survive for so long? He committed burglaries to steal food, supplies, and equipment. He was eventually charged with 14 counts each of burglary and theft committed while on the run. He knew the bush intimately, having worked as a shearer and abattoir worker. He understood how to move through the terrain, where to find water, and how to avoid detection. Naden was finally captured in March 2012 in a run-down cabin approximately 30 kilometers west of Gloucester by heavily armed officers from the Tactical Operations Unit in a night operation. After pleading guilty to all 32 counts against him, he was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 40 years without parole. The Naden case demonstrated something important. Even with modern technology, extensive resources, and a dedicated strike force, a knowledgeable fugitive can survive in the Australian bush for years. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but it's possible. Then Gino and Mark Stoccos, a father and son duo, spent 8 years on the run from 2007 to 2015. Their story is different from Naden's because they didn't hide in the wilderness. Instead, they moved constantly through rural Australia, working on farms and properties, stealing what they needed, and staying just ahead of police. After a run-in with police in 2007, father and son Gino and Mark Stoccos went completely off the grid, traveling all around the country working as farmhands. For years, they were carrying out moonlight raids to steal goods, going on vandalism sprees, and living for long stretches without phones, licenses, bank accounts, or friends. What's fascinating about the Stoccos is how they exploited Australia's rural isolation. They would work on remote properties for periods of time, often using false identities or no identification at all. When things got tense or they needed to move on, they simply disappeared and found another property hundreds of kilometers away. By August 2015, Gino was on a list of Australia's 20 most wanted fugitives after 3 particularly nasty acts of revenge involving extensive property damage and theft. They had burned down farm sheds, slashed tires, and committed numerous thefts from properties where they'd previously worked. They eventually ended up working on an illegal cannabis farm at Ilong, near Dubbo, where they murdered 68-year-old caretaker Rosario Simone. The murder forced them back on the road. On October 16, 2015, police spotted the Stoccos in their stolen 4WD near Wagga Wagga and attempted to pull them over. The Stoccos opened fire on highway patrol officers, triggering what would become a massive 12-day manhunt. The manhunt captivated the nation. Police searched properties across southern New South Wales and northern Victoria, following reported sightings and stolen vehicle reports. The Stoccos repeatedly evaded capture by switching vehicles, crossing state borders, and hiding on remote properties. They were finally arrested on October 28, 2015, back at the Pinevale property near Dunedoo, where they'd murdered Simone. Police discovered Simone's body buried in a shallow grave on the property. Both Gino and Mark Stoccos were sentenced to 40 years in prison. Gino, then 59, faces the possibility of dying in prison, while Mark won't be eligible for parole until 2045. The Stoccos case showed that fugitives don't need to hide in the bush to evade capture for years. Australia's rural network of remote properties, its culture of not asking too many questions about itinerant workers, and the sheer distances involved created opportunities for them to remain undetected while actively committing crimes. Perhaps the most remarkable Australian fugitive story belongs to Darko Desic, though his story challenges our assumptions about what it means to be on the run. Desic escaped from Grafton Correctional Centre on the night of August 1, 1992, using a hacksaw blade and bolt cutters to cut through cell window bars and a perimeter fence. He was 13 months into a 3.5-year sentence for growing marijuana. Born in the former Yugoslavia, Desic told police he escaped because he thought he would be deported once he had served his sentence. He feared he would be punished for failing to do his compulsory military service. Here's where the story becomes extraordinary. Desic didn't hide in the outback. He fled to Sydney's northern beaches, specifically the suburb of Avalon, where he worked as a cash-in-hand labourer and handyman. He lived there for 30 years, 3 decades in one of Sydney's wealthiest suburbs, working for local families, known to neighbours as Dougie. Desic was mentioned once on the TV series Australia's Most Wanted when someone thought they saw him in Nora, south of Sydney. But police never found him. He simply continued his quiet life, avoiding official documentation, working for cash, and staying out of trouble. In September 2021, Sydney's COVID-19 lockdown cost Desic his work and his accommodation. He became homeless and started sleeping on the beach. On Sunday morning, he decided to hand himself in at DY police station, telling police he thought life behind bars would be easier than being homeless. A police source told media he slept on the beach on Saturday night and said, "Stuff it, I'll go back to prison where there's a roof over my head." The Desic case revealed something about Australia's fugitive problem that goes beyond geography. Australia's size isn't just about physical space, it's about the anonymity that comes with a small, dispersed population. In a country where millions of people live in remote or rural areas, where cash work is common, and where people value privacy and don't ask too many questions, it's possible to simply disappear into the population. Desic wasn't hiding in the bush. He was hiding in plain sight, and he did it successfully for 3 decades. Not all manhunts end in capture. Some fugitives remain free, their cases cold but never closed. John Victor Bobak has been wanted for a double murder since 1991. He allegedly burst through the ceiling of a Gold Coast unit and shot former bookie Peter Wade and his partner Maureen Ambrose. He was last seen in Surfers Paradise, Queensland. That was 33 years ago. Bobak, now 74 years old, remains one of Australia's most wanted fugitives. Police warn he should not be approached under any circumstances, and there's a $250,000 reward for information on his whereabouts. Where is he? Is he even still alive? These questions haunt cold cases like this. Bobak could be anywhere in Australia. He could have left the country illegally. He could have assumed a false identity. He could be living in a remote area where nobody knows his real name or his past. Or he could be dead, his body never discovered in one of Australia's vast, empty spaces. The Bobak case represents the ultimate challenge of Australian law enforcement. When someone truly disappears, when they leave no trail, no sightings, no evidence, how do you find them in a country this size? The recent Desi Freeman case has brought Australia's manhunt challenges back into the spotlight. Freeman allegedly shot and killed 2 police officers at his Porpunka property in Victoria's High Country in August 2025 and fled into dense bushland. The 56-year-old suspect knows the bush like the back of his hand, according to locals, and the dangerous, complex terrain has hampered search efforts. The manhunt has involved hundreds of officers from Victoria, Interstate, the Australian Federal Police, the Army, and even specialist police from New Zealand. Victoria Police offered a record $1 million reward for information leading to Freeman's capture. Yet weeks passed without a confirmed sighting. The Freeman case demonstrates that even with unprecedented resources, modern technology, international assistance, and Australia's largest ever reward, finding someone in the Australian bush remains extraordinarily difficult. Australia has only had 4 significant outlaws or fugitives in the past 40 years: John Bobak, Brendan Abbott, Darko Desic, and Malcolm Naden. The rarity of such cases means police have limited experience and few precedents to guide their operations. So why fugitives succeed and fail? Looking at these cases, patterns emerge about what makes a successful fugitive in Australia and what ultimately leads to capture. Knowledge of the terrain is crucial. Malcolm Naden and Desi Freeman both knew their local areas intimately. They understood where to find water, where to hide, and how to move through difficult terrain. This local knowledge can extend a manhunt by months or even years. Movement versus staying hidden. The Stoccos stayed free by constantly moving, never settling long enough to establish a pattern. Naden survived by remaining in familiar territory. Desic succeeded by never moving at all, just staying in one place and blending in, resources and supplies. Every fugitive needs food, water and supplies. This is often what exposes them. Naden committed burglaries. The Stoccos stole vehicles and fuel. These activities create opportunities for police to predict their movements and set up surveillance. The human factor. Ultimately, most fugitives are caught because someone sees them and reports it. Community support matters enormously. When locals are sympathetic or indifferent, fugitives can hide longer. When communities are outraged and actively watching, capture comes quicker. Time and resources. Police can't maintain maximum effort indefinitely. After weeks or months, manhunts are scaled down. Officers return to regular duties. This is when fugitives either make mistakes from desperation or successfully disappear for the long term. Technology has limits. Despite drones, helicopters, thermal imaging, and sophisticated tracking equipment, the Australian landscape can still defeat technology. Dense forest canopy blocks thermal imaging, rough terrain grounds helicopters, vast distances strain resources. Also, there's the cost of distance. These manhunts reveal the financial and human cost of policing Australia's vast territory. The Malcolm Naden manhunt cost New South Wales Police millions of dollars over 7 years. The Stoccos manhunt involved hundreds of officers across multiple states for weeks. The Desi Freeman operation required military assistance and international cooperation. For rural police stations, a major manhunt can completely consume their resources. Officers are pulled from regular duties. Other crimes receive less attention. Communities become anxious and afraid, and sometimes, despite everything, the fugitive escapes, or dies in the bush, or simply vanishes without trace. Then the outback reality. There's a romantic notion of the outback fugitive, the bushranger legend, the lone individual defying authority in the wilderness. The reality is far less romantic. The bush is brutal. Water sources are unreliable. Temperatures swing from blistering heat to freezing cold. Insects are relentless. Wildlife can be dangerous. Injuries that would be minor inconveniences in the city can become life-threatening in remote areas. Most people who flee into the Australian bush don't become successful fugitives. They become search and rescue cases. They become lost. They die from exposure, dehydration, or injuries. The ones who succeed, like Naden or the Stoccos, do so through a combination of local knowledge, careful planning, and often sheer luck. And even then, it's not a life anyone would choose. It's constant stress, constant movement, and constant fear of capture. Modern technology has changed manhunts significantly. Police now have access to tools that would have seemed like science fiction decades ago. Drones with thermal cameras, satellite tracking, sophisticated communications networks, and databases that can cross-reference sightings across states. But Australia's terrain continues to present challenges that technology can't fully overcome. Dense forest canopy blocks drone surveillance. Mountain ranges create communication dead zones. Vast distances limit the effective range of search equipment. And there's a simpler problem. You need to know roughly where to look before technology helps. In a search area covering thousands of square kilometers, even the best technology is searching for a needle in a haystack. One underappreciated aspect of Australian manhunts is the role of rural communities. In remote areas, everyone knows everyone. Strangers are noticed. Unusual activity is reported. But rural Australians also have a tradition of minding their own business and respecting privacy. Remote properties might be visited once a year, if that. Itinerant workers moving between farms are common and unremarkable. Cash work without proper documentation is widespread. This creates a strange dynamic. Communities want to help police catch dangerous fugitives, but they're also suspicious of too much government interference. They value independence and privacy, even for strangers. The Stoccos exploited this cultural dynamic for 8 years. They worked on properties, kept to themselves, and moved on before anyone asked too many questions. Desic did the same thing in suburban Sydney, where anonymity comes from density rather than isolation. But what do these difficult manhunts teach us about policing in Australia? First, prevention matters more than pursuit. The Stoccos were petty criminals for years before they murdered someone. Naden had a history of violence. Better intervention early might have prevented their extended criminal careers. Second, rural policing needs resources. Small stations in remote areas can't handle major manhunts alone. They need support, backup, and access to specialist units. But maintaining these resources across Australia's vast territory is expensive. Third, community relationships matter. When locals trust police and actively report suspicious activity, manhunts succeed faster. When that trust breaks down, fugitives can hide longer. Fourth, Australia needs to accept that some fugitives will never be caught. The country is simply too big, too empty, and too challenging. Resources are finite. At some point, active manhunts end, even if the case remains open. Australia's geography creates a unique challenge for law enforcement. The combination of massive territory, small population, extreme conditions, and limited infrastructure means that determined fugitives can evade capture for extended periods. Malcolm Naden survived in the bush for 7 years. The Stoccos moved through rural Australia for 8 years. Darko Desic lived openly in Sydney for 3 decades. Bobak has been missing for 33 years. These cases aren't failures of policing. They're the reality of trying to find individuals in the 6th largest country in the world, where most of the landmass is empty, where distances are measured in hours of driving, and where privacy and independence are deeply valued cultural traits. Modern technology helps, but it can't overcome the fundamental challenge. Australia is vast, and people who want to disappear can still find ways to do so. The next time you see news of a manhunt in Australia, remember these cases. Remember that behind the helicopters and search teams, there's a simple geographical reality. This country is very, very big, and sometimes people just vanish into it. Thanks for watching Behind the Crime Scene. Stay safe, stay informed, and remember, the Outback isn't just beautiful and dangerous. It's also the perfect place to disappear.